He's worried that good relations with America will tomorrow lead to American think tanks and American intellectuals coming to Iran, spreading democracy, spreading women's rights, and convincing people that their system doesn't work. So he's prepared to pay a price for that to keep the Americans out.
The deaths of Iran's president and the country's foreign minister in a helicopter crash have left Tehran in a state of flux. Serving officials insist there will be no big policy changes. So will the death of President Ebrahim Raisi go essentially unnoticed? Not at least for the next 5 days, which have been written off for national mourning. We're joined now by Meir Javedanfar, Professor of Iranian politics at Reichman University. Good morning to you, Meir.
Good morning.
Is the lesson here that he wasn't a popular or successful president in many respects? What sort of gap is he left? What sort of space do you think will be occupied by his death?
I think it's not going to be very difficult to fill his shoes because he did such a terrible job with Iran's economy. He had a terrible past as being one of the judges that sentenced to death something between 3,000 to 30,000 Iranian prisoners at the end of the 1980s. And he didn't have much of an education, and he was there because of the graces of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, because he was trusted by the Supreme Leader. And once in position, one of the few places where the president does have more leverage is the economy, and he completely messed it up. I mean, very populist policies. Instead of cutting expenses for some of the wasteful regime activities to pay for the budget deficit, his government printed money at an unprecedented rate, and that pushed up inflation and brought down the value of the Iranian currency, very much similar to what's happening in Argentina, what has been happening in Argentina until Javier Milei was elected.
So is there a chance for some of this to, because one of the stories that we consider from Iran is the pressure building on the regime, and presumably he increased that pressure by his incompetence. Is there a chance that someone more competent might take over and therefore reduce the pressure on the regime?
Well, that really depends. See, the problem is this. Every time Ayatollah Khamenei allows a competent president to come in, like Mr. Rouhani or Mr. Khatami was president between 1997 and 2005. Mr. Rouhani was president between 2013 and 2021. I mean, both are, of course, loyalists to Mr. Khamenei, but they were more competent. They wanted to reduce inflation, which they successfully did. But they wanted to improve the livelihood of Iranians. And because they were more competent and because they understood what really needs to be done, they told the Supreme Leader that Iran needs to reassess and rethink and re-strategize its relations with America, which means basically significantly reducing tensions and also to reduce tensions in the Middle East in order to attract investment. But this is something that's a non-starter to Ayatollah Khamenei, because I think what your viewers would find interesting is that the Supreme Leader of Iran is more scared of American soft power than American hard power. He's worried that good relations with America will tomorrow lead to American think tanks and American intellectuals coming to Iran, spreading democracy, spreading women's rights, and convincing people that their system doesn't work. So he's prepared to pay a price for that to keep the Americans out. Iran is one of the very few countries in the Middle East that does not have a U.S. embassy, and that's precisely because of this concern.
That's such a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, the danger of the contagion of a democratic way of life coming that way seems very striking. Meir, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Meir Javedanfar, Professor of Iranian politics at Reichman University.
Iran's entered a 5-day period of mourning after the death of the country's president, Ebrahim Raisi, and the foreign minister were killed, as you know, in a helicopter crash on Sunday. That news confirmed just this time yesterday. Mr. Raisi had been sort of tipped as the potential successor to the supreme leader. Lots of implications to follow. Elections are going to be held at the very end of June to choose a new president. But let's assess how this news is actually going down in the country. Jessica Baker is the Sun's foreign news reporter. Jessica, just explain, we've got this 5 days of mourning and the funeral. What do we know of the plans?
Good morning, Rosie. So what we know so far is that there have been funeral arrangements made to honour the president and the other crash victims. So we believe there were 8 in total, according to Iranian media. And those arrangements will commence today. So the ceremonies will start in the northwestern city of Tabriz, and the bodies of the state officials would be transported to the city of There'll be a procession and commemoration ceremony from this afternoon. It will begin 4 p.m. 2 p.m. UK time, and then the funeral procession will continue tomorrow. So it'll commence in Tehran in the morning. The bodies of the crash victims will be sent there, and there'll be a farewell ceremony in the evening. But what Vice President of the Republic, Mohsen Mansouri, announced yesterday is that Raisi's funeral ceremony will be held on Thursday evening, and he'll be laid to rest in a burial ceremony in Mashhad, which is his hometown.
And that will sort of culminate the period of mourning. When that's described, we know that, kind of government loyalists, are packing into mosques and squares to pray for Raisi and also the foreign minister. What actually is the mood across the country? Because it appears to be fairly muted.
Yeah, you're right. Government loyalists, well, they've been filling mosques and squares to pray for Raisi and for the foreign minister. But most shops remain open. There wasn't really much of an effort made by authorities to interrupt ordinary life. We have heard from experts that the regime will be looking to orchestrate tears and sadness over the death right now. But we know for certain that not everybody is upset. There have in the past been massive demonstrations against Raisi's regime. As a result of its crackdown on hijab wearing. So rights groups have said that hundreds of Iranians died in 2022 and 2023 in demonstrations that were triggered by the death of a young Iranian woman who was arrested by morality police. So on Monday, we saw celebrations across Iran when news broke, even just that the helicopter had crashed and that Raisi was missing. We saw Iranian residents taking to the streets. Video emerged of them setting off fireworks. We had videos of women who had been affected by the regime raising a glass to news of the crash. Video of people dancing in front of TV news channels as they broadcast updates on the helicopter crash. So we do know that not everyone in Iran is upset right now.
Clearly. Jessica, thank you so much. Just giving us a bit of a glimpse. And obviously the people who are posting publicly are doing so taking on some degree of personal risk in being sort of celebratory about that news. So the funeral to take place on Thursday. Jessica Baker, The Sun's foreign news reporter, thank you.
هر شهیدی و خانوادش میاد